Water. 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 Everywhere. It's everywhere in our readings today. Water from rocks. Water from wells. And this new kind of water, this kind of sustenance from someone who declares that you will never again be thirsty. Could we ever be so fortunate, never be thirsty again? Well, how deep a drink do you think you must take to never be thirsty again? It seems like it would be quite a gulp to provide. Now, I know there aren't that many 7-Elevens around here, stores, right? But you remember, they still do. I remember when they started selling the big gulp. Yes, well, a couple people know. That was back when Wendy's and McDonald's used to sell regular-sized drinks, right? 7-Eleven had the market on a seemingly bottomless fountain drink. And I think it started out like 48 ounces. It could have been bigger, I don't know. But heck, 48 ounces these days is like a regular at the fast food stores now. It's like, the kids keep on getting bigger. You know, but back when the superfluous wasn't so superfluous, the big gulp was enough to hold you for a really long time. The difference between now and then is that the big gulp isn't anymore. The bigger than your head burritos, I don't know if you ever heard somebody tell you something like that. Those don't even fill your palm anymore. They got them huge now. Now, for today's first glance of the Exodus story, talks about water that wouldn't appear to be a deep drink. Instead, Moses, he takes his staff and he strikes a stone in the middle of the desert. And water pours from the stone. This happened in the midst of a forced march, basically. In the midst of an epic time of wilderness searching for the Israelite people. Now, the real depth of the story, this Exodus story, is really in the metaphor that it presents to us. So many people have had an issue with the Hebrew Scripture, the Old Testament. You know, people think, well, it's fanciful, or it's miraculous, or it's too violent, or you name it. There's all kinds of things we can say about it. Because we often say, well, why don't I see any of that stuff happening now? Right? It's a common question. Well, we need to remember something. Many of you know an author that we've studied here. We've done it in Lenten studies in the past. Marcus Borg. He's a contemporary biblical scholar. He talks about the problem that you and I often have with reading the stories of the Hebrew Scriptures that are contained in the Bible and the New Testament. Also, he says, he reminds us that we often forget that the stories and the events that occurred in the Bible were not written down on the day that they happened. And they were not written down on the day after they happened either. We forget that there were no newspapers, and that the eyewitness news chopper wasn't out hovering over on top of them to bring us the latest news on the Israelites in the desert. There was nothing. There weren't even notebooks to record this. There wasn't even paper to record this. So, if the Exodus story were to occur today, of course we'd have the latest news. It would be breaking news, right? It didn't happen that way. We didn't get the story that way. It came to us in a different way. 3 or 4 or 5,000 years ago, an event occurred, and it only got carried to us through the memories that were passed along from person to person to person. Sort of like the backpacks on their back, they carried it with them wherever they went, but it really wasn't ever written down. Who knows when the story actually occurred? And when it was actually written down, was it first just a bunch of pictures, or maybe it was some figures, some figures on a piece of papyrus, or even on a stone or something that was scratched out. Some kind of crude form of telling the story and passing it along that sufficed as a written language. Now, from memory and from deciphering the written record, those records that we do have, the story came to us in the form that it is now. A story of many people on an epic 40-year journey through burning sands amidst the African desert. And they were thirsty. That's the most important thing. They were thirsty. Now, 40 years is a really long time to wander. Most of us gripe, are we there yet after 30 minutes? But when did this take place? And was the people's thirstiness a regular thing that Moses had to deal with, like the kids in the back seat? Or was this a specific thing that happened this one time? All of a sudden they were without water for once in a while, just once in a long time, and they really had to begin to complain. Now, Mr. Borg suggests that we should not focus on this, we should focus on a straightforward fact. What was reported was, obviously the story is an incredible story, but the underlying struggle of the people that was there. And the story underlying it all was that they were thirsty. They needed something to quench them. That was the most symbolic, deep meaning of this whole story. So the story of somebody striking a rock and water coming from it would be obviously an important thing. When a columnist, writes a story in the paper, they're commenting about something that's happening in the world or something that's happening right nearby. Don't, when they write that story, especially at the end, don't they inject some sort of symbol or metaphor in their comments to bridge the physical and the emotional of the moment of the event that occurred, so that you can be there also? Of course they do. They do something to get you in touch with what the feelings of the people that they are reporting on were having. So it is with one of the oldest and deeply communicative devices that the writer of Exodus reaches out to you today, from ages ago, to describe to you what was going on, what they were really dealing with, what they were really feeling. Remember, 3, 4, 5,000 years ago, how do you tell a story that's meaningful unless it is something that you're aware of and you know about? They reach out with this story. And what do they come up with? Thirst. They were thirsty. You've been thirsty, haven't you? Yeah, of course you have. There have been times when you choked, you were so thirsty. They were thirsty people. And not only were they thirsty up here, I'm getting thirsty myself, just talking about it so much, but it's this depth of thirst, it's this spiritual thirst. There's something missing. It's what they're trying to convey. And that's what's being told to us. They need to be quenched with hope. They've been in the wilderness for 40 years, for crying out loud. When are we getting home? When are we getting there? That's the story of the water coming from the stone. What it's trying to convey. It's trying to convey that not only were they thirsty and that they were out in the desert and they were wandering forever and ever, but they're trying to link you to them, to convey that you and they had something in common, to convey the connection that you are not alone in your thirst. You are not the first person to be thirsty. You are not the last person who will be thirsty. You are one of many who are seemingly wandering through this great desert of life in need of settling and refreshment. And perhaps your feelings of abandonment or loneliness after striking out on your own are shared by countless people throughout the ages. But there's hope. And hope may lie in an uncommon spot, such as that stone that you may come across today or tomorrow or the next. Now, as Moses prayed, as he spoke to God, he found that if he could remain faithful and compassionate, mind you, in the midst of his own doubt and his own torment, he was thirsty too. A quenching torrent of relief could come from the least likely places. Then there's the story of Jesus. He goes to this well. He's been out wandering around with his pals. He sends them into town to get food. They're hungry too, but they're thirsty. He's at this well, the well of Jacob. And though that well is shared by many, many people, it was claimed by the Jewish people as theirs. This well was a place of sustenance and relief. It was a place that by reaching deep down into the belly of the earth, you could pull up sustenance to relieve and provide refreshment, to cool the person. And when the Samaritan woman and Jesus are speaking, the conversation, really, it's wordplay. I don't know if you were listening closely. It's a wordplay that they're doing. And when the Samaritan woman speaks, she speaks of just plain old water. And Jesus is speaking of something much more deep. A well that is much deeper than she could possibly dip into. And much more sophisticated than mere metaphor. The metaphor that Jesus is speaking of is really himself. He's saying he is the water. Inundated, perhaps even drowning in the torrent of other people's interpretations throughout the last 3,000 or 4,000 years, whether of this story of Jesus or the story of the people in Exodus. We've been battered about with claims that within our scripture lie truths that are as good as fact, as certain as today's headlines, as real as if we were watching it from the eyewitness news helicopter. Now tell me something. Have you ever been a part of a news event? Ever been present when something big happens and you are an eyewitness to it? And then you go home and you turn on the news or you read the paper and you go, that's not what happened. Right? Now imagine something 3,000 or 4,000 years ago. What's being conveyed to us is there was thirst. I don't know. Moses went up to a rock, hit it, and a bunch of water came out. I love the story, and I love that kind of power. But what is sort of lost, if we just take that literally, is tragically lost, is the deep truth of the symbolism that you, by being a part of the story and a part of eyewitness to your own life, that you can take away something from this very story and something from those times when you feel so thirsty. You've been thirsty. Have you been looking for a place to settle in your life? Have you really wanted to meet somebody who really knows you and knows what you need? Have you wanted someone that you could turn to, maybe with your dirty little secrets and the fears that drive your everyday life? So next time you read the Bible, the next time you hear it read, especially from someone over there, listen more deeply. Imagine it's not that that real well that you're dipping down into with the bucket. But imagine it's a well that's more deep than that. Listen with your heart. Listen with your fear. Listen with your unsettledness. Listen with your thirst. Listen with an understanding, though, that you are not alone. And you are not first in that thirst. You know, we toss aside our newspapers every single day. We aren't even using them, some of us, anymore. There's a reason, though, that the Bible has survived the centuries. It's going to survive after us, too. It's a big gulp. Really, it is. But it's a drink that you can carry a long, long way. And it's a drink that tells you, you are not alone, my friend. Know that you're not alone. And that God will be with you through the wilderness. Friends, let us stand now as we sing our next hymn. Verses 1 and 5. The song is Love Unto You.